Roll call. Who's my secretary?
I am. Andy Bacon. Here. Eric Curtin. Here. Olin Gambrell.
Here.
Jim Miller.
Here.
Tom Eady.
Here.
Tom Sever.
Here.
First order of business is the adoption of the minutes from our last meeting.
Adoption minutes from the March 29th meeting.
I have a first, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. First case this evening is Mr. Curtin.
Petition of On the Pond LLC, Justin Picura, by their attorney Sean Bouchard, for a special use permit from section 602 to allow the use of the property as a brewery in a limited business zoning district. Said real estate is located at 124 Aquidneck Avenue and further identified as lot 137 on tax assessor's plat 115.
Go ahead and read the second
Yeah, okay,
case.
yeah. And, also the petition of On the Pond LLC by their attorney Sean Bouchard for a variance from section 603, 701, and 803G to allow the construction of an exterior walkway and staircase as a means of egress from the second floor of the existing structure with a left yard setback of 3.9 feet where 20 feet is required, and a rear yard setback of 48.2 feet where 50 feet is required. Said real estate is located at 124 Aquidneck Avenue and further identified as lot 137 on tax assessor's plat 115.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Sean Bouchard. I'm an attorney from the law offices of Silva, Thomas, Martland, and Offenberg. I'm here this evening representing On the Pond LLC and Justin Picura, the owner and applicant for this application. The petitioners this evening are seeking to receive a special use permit to allow a brewery, which is classified as a food manufacturing use under the Middletown zoning ordinance, which requires a special use permit in the limited business district. This is at the property located at 124 Aquidneck Avenue. There has been a minor alteration between the plans that were initially filed with this application and our current rendition. The current plan is shown on the screens in front of you. We did drop off updated plans today to represent the altered circulation pattern on the site. We believe this to be a more beneficial use for everyone. I'm joined this evening by the applicant, Justin Picura, who will be the individual who's actually running the proposed brewery. I also have Scott Kermill, who's here. He's the main member of On the Pond LLC, who can answer any questions related to the ownership of the property. I do have Paul Bannon, a traffic engineer, who is prepared to testify related to any questions you might have when it comes to the traffic impacts of this proposed use. We have Mike Russell, who did the site survey for this property and can answer any questions related to the engineering aspects. I have Spencer McComb from Cordston Design, who can answer any questions related to the architecture as well as the internal footprint of the brewery. Nate Godfrey will be present. He's running a little bit behind, but he will be here for the compliance with the comprehensive plan as well as the impacts of this. Sorry. Yep.
Can you pull that closer to your,
Yeah, is that better? Sorry, leaning away. But Nathan Godfrey will be prepared to testify related to the impacts on the community and well as the compliance with the special use criteria. So with that said, I would ask that Justin Picura please come up and provide us with some testimony related to the proposed brewery.
Okay. Mr. Picura, raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Justin Picura, 56 Admiral Calbfus Road, Newport, Rhode Island, 02840.
Thank you. Could you please spell your name?
P-E-K-E-R-A.
Okay, so Mr. Picura, it's my understanding that you are going to be the representative who will be running the proposed brewery at the property located at 124 Aquidneck Avenue. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the operation that's envisioned to go in at this property?
Yeah, we're looking to start a locally grown Middletown microbrewery, craft brewery, small operation in the larger aspect of what you see in some breweries. We'll have a 7-barrel system, which is kind of in the entry level of what you'll see from much larger breweries. We're looking to just do manufacturing of beer, so there won't be any food sales. It's not going to be a brew pub. It'll be strictly just the manufacturing of it. What our ideal situation is that we'll be doing all of our brewing in-house. We'll have a small pickup station, almost a merchandise room that will offer to-go sales, which is limited to, I think, a 30-pack per day per person. And then in addition to that, what we'd be looking for is just having some people come in for tasting, whether it be small numbers during any time that myself or our brewer would be brewing. Most of our space would be shut off just that tasting area to the public. And then once the brewing is done during the morning to afternoon, that could open up to the public in a little bit bigger capacity for the tasting area. So as people come in, they stop, pick up a 30-pack, 6-pack, whatever that might be, and maybe do a tasting. And that'd be more of like the local feel. Some of the appeal that I've had is my fiance grew up in Middletown, and so for over the years I've been coming to see her family and my family and kind of fallen in love with the area and really love the location that we're looking for. I think it's great for that kind of feel. And we love that there's a lot of foot traffic from local people, as well as, in the summertime when it's season, there's plenty of hotel rooms and foot traffic that could be had for the location.
So when we're talking about the tastings versus the retail component of someone picking up a 30-pack, you are limited in the amount of alcohol you're allowed to sell to somebody for consumption on site. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's, I think, I know it's 36 ounces of an actual pour. So really, 3 beers, and then you're no longer able to sell to somebody from the tasting room aspect. If they wanted to then buy a 30-pack to go, they could.
It's not shown on the TV just yet, but in terms of the internal layout for the site, we do have a small tasting bar, but there is no seating provided within the operation for someone to come and sit down and have an extended stay while they're having their drinks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Right. And so the focal point of this operation is for the actual manufacturing component. That's what will be occurring throughout the day while you're operating.
Yeah, and I should mention as well that, we will look for local distribution to bars within, the Aquidneck Island area. Also, Aquidneck Island already has a good presence in the craft beer realm. So there's other people to team up with. I've already reached out to the Rhode Island Brewers Guild and started the initial application for that to become a part of that. We haven't fully disclosed anything yet because we're still waiting for this approval from you, the board.
And so in terms of the operation, this is not a seasonal business, correct? This would be operating year-round?
Year-round, that's correct. I think based off of, how things run with, the summertime and the large number of people that influx in at that time, we would have a slight change based off of more expectation of foot traffic during those times with the hotels full. But as far as, appealing to the public, we really want to reach out and appeal to the local community and make them feel like it's, it's their beer being brewed just down the street.
And since you've mentioned the support or the intention to work with the community, we have received several emails in support of this proposal. I don't believe they were provided to the board yet, but we have received numerous letters of support from various abutters as well as members of the community who are interested in this proposal being put forward, and ask that we submit these as part of this application.
Okay. We'll mark it Exhibit A.
All right. At this time, I don't believe I have any further questions for Mr. Becerra at this time. If the board has any specific questions related to the operation itself, we'd be happy to entertain those at this point.
So patrons are not going to be able to come in and sit down and have more than 3 beers, you said?
That's correct. That's what the law allows.
They're not going to be allowed to sit. You're not going to have.
Well, we would have some stools at the tasting bar, but not something that they'd be able, basically they'd only be able to sit and order the 3 beers. That would be the limitation.
So if I got it right, I can go in there, try a beer, if I like it, I can buy a 30-pack and leave.
That's correct. Oftentimes we'll also, whether it's myself being the assistant brewer to our head brewer, one of the two of us could be there. And so as you come and pick up a 30-pack, we might be at the end of the day of a brewing. And, they might have the interest to come in and say, oh, can you tell us a little bit about the beer? So there's an appeal to the tasting room to be right there where you're brewing, open to the, the space, and to have the people actually making it. I think it enforces that, local feel that people are doing it here in your hometown.
What would be your hours of operation?
I think our main plan right now is for off-season, we would be Wednesday through the weekend. Usually, around 5 o'clock open to the public where, brewing wouldn't be going on. So we would close down a good portion of the actual floor to not allow any public on. It'd just be a very small isolated area where the tasting bar would be. And then, at night, when the brewing functionality is closed down, everything's cooled off and there's, no more hazards, we can open up a little bit more space. And then that would kind of open around 5 o'clock and then, probably close around 10.
So the hours of operation for public consumption would be from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to approximately?
In the tasting room, and then, if I was, working as a brewer that day and, we got a plan for a doorbell, or if it was busy enough, we'd have somebody stationed in the to-go area. So that way there'd be cases of beer that they could pick up anytime during the day. But the actual brewing area wouldn't be open till 5 to 10 to public.
You said bring the doorbell?
Yeah, well, we had talked about, just because sometimes we might not have enough traffic, like in the off-season, for example. If I'm the brewer and I'm brewing, there might be a doorbell that might be stationed so that if we heard that going, we'd run up to the front so we could open the door and sell a pack. That's our initial plan till we get kind of going off the ground so we could have somebody stationed in that merchandise area.
Is a liquor license required because of the tasting room?
No, it's not.
That's the component of the manufacturing license, and that's why they're
Right.
limited to that 32-ounce pour. That's
Right.
that's that limitation when it comes to being a manufacturer as opposed to just a retail sale.
Would your brewing license be at risk if you did not adhere to the 36 ounces?
That's correct. Yeah, that's a state requirement, and if there was a violation of that, then the actual state manufacturing license would be put at jeopardy.
How many employees do you anticipate?
It'll be myself and the head brewer, and then probably additionally 1 to maybe 2 more people that would, we'd never have more than 3 people on working at a time.
And just kind of a follow-up, in terms of the distribution component of the brewing, obviously, we're going to be creating barrels of beer here. Those will be distributed throughout the island. Is that going to be done using box trucks, or how do we envision the product being moved out of the site to the ultimate consumers?
Yeah, for the numbers that we would be actually pushing out of there, we wouldn't have a big enough operation to do anything really need more than a box truck. More often than not, be kegs into a smaller van rather than an actual, 10-foot U-Haul size box truck would be probably the extent of it. A lot of that information, like specifics about that, we haven't solidified any distribution just because we haven't gotten approval yet, but we have reached out and talked to them already.
How will you deal with suppliers delivering to you hops?
So the supplies will be bought in bulk, and so it would be pretty infrequent. My thought is that we would have probably at a busy time 2 deliveries a month, and fortunately there is a fairly large distributor in Rhode Island that's not too far away. So we still haven't crunched the numbers to see if it makes sense for us to go to pick up those supplies locally, but at the numbers we'll be doing, a lot of that we could pick up just from the back of a pickup truck.
Okay.
So, if we're doing large numbers, then probably twice a month we'll have probably another box truck size, but no tractor trailers that need to really get to the premises. Except for the brewing equipment will take some time, but that'll be the one time where we'll actually have a probably 40-foot tractor trailer that's going to be dropping off equipment. But besides that, nothing.
What percentage of your business do you think will be distribution versus sales?
Well, there's the hope, and then the
Reality.
the reality. You know, as we go into it, you know, we want to start off strong with, you know, selling, you know, 30 packs out of the merchandise store is ideal for us because it has the best markup. You don't pay as much out and have a smaller markup on the distribution. But at the same time, we need to kind of establish, you know, the name and local bars is the best way to market that product. So to begin with, I think we're going to be a little heavier on the distribution. I would like to say it'd be a 60-40 distribution to, you know, selling out in-house, but, you know,
I meant more as far as selling 3 pints versus selling a keg or, you know, or a 30 pack. You know, the question is, you know, are you gonna be running a bar, you know?
right. You know, I don't think that there's going to be really enough to support a heavy influx of people just standing around the bar. There's, you know, with us working and getting that supply and demand out through distribution, I think a large part of it's going to be just the distribution. And then we also don't have a ton of parking there to meet those kind of demands where people are going to come park and take up that space for very long. So, yeah, I would say, you know, a higher percentage is going to be distribution and a lot less sales at that bar. Because of, you know, the situation as far as, you know, how we're going to man this. I'll be brewing, you know, a good amount and I'll be running things. So the tasting room is going to be ideally do, you know, just personal tastings and walk people through more so than encouraging people to sit down and you know, take up shop at the bar.
Is there any limits to how much you do in sales to the public to where you have to get a bar license?
Based off of manufacturing, no. It just really limits it to that daily sale of the 36 ounces of a tasting room, and then that doesn't limit them to then go buy that beer. So besides that limitation, I'm unaware of any other Rhode Island regulations that limit that in any way.
Is this your first experience with a brewery?
No, it's not. I've been installing breweries for the past 3 years, and through that process, I kind of came up the idea with, you know, oh, this is a great business, and then also making a lot of contacts. Our head brewer is the one that kind of got me into that installation process, and then, you know, through making that contact and talking to multiple different breweries that were starting up, kind of just got excited about it, and then at the same time, having the connection to Middletown just kind of all fell into place. And I just relocated, you know, 2 months ago to live here, so big changes just personally. So,
Are there any other questions for Mr. Piquer at this time? Okay. I think I'm going to, thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
I'll ask that Scott Kermel come up for a moment.
Mr. Chairman, may I just ask some questions of the prior witness?
Yeah, that might make sense to do that. Yeah.
Just some brief cross-examination.
Yeah.
My name is Gerard Galvin. I'm an attorney in Newport. I represent the city of Newport. We're a direct abutter to the, I guess, the west of the property. It's the Big Pond area.
The reservoir.
The reservoir, right. Justin, you mentioned off-season hours, most likely being from 5 to 10.
Mhm.
How's that going to change in the summer during the busy months?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Gotta
Yeah,
speak.
sure.
Please share.
In the off-season, the testimony was the hours will be from 5 to 10. I'm just wondering what during the busy season, what the hours will be.
Well, I imagine that if there's, you know, a little bit more influx of people, we might, you know, have the desire on like a Friday or Saturday night to stay a little later. But I don't imagine any later than 11 on a Friday or Saturday. And I would say probably stay consistent for the weekdays, but we, you know, during summertime, we would open Monday, Tuesday based off of necessity.
So potentially 7 days a week and potentially till 11 o'clock during the summer. Would you be open earlier than 5 o'clock in the afternoon, evening during the summer?
To the public, as far as the tasting room, no, we would be just running mostly the brewing. Well, actually, let me say, in the summertime, based on need, it will increase our need to brew. So we'll have days where we really need to just keep that locked down. It's yet to be seen how much brewing actually needs to be done to meet the demand. So based off of that, that'll justify what days we can open up. So I don't know if that answers your question as
So you're
well
not
as-
sure yet?
Not entirely sure. We have the hope to, being brewing 2 to 3 days a week, but we don't know that there's been that much demand yet.
If it's very, very popular, which I think it very well could be.
I would hope so.
Right, we all hope so, if it comes to fruition. But would you expand your hours of operation to the public if the demand is there, such that they're coming in before 5, maybe staying a little later than 11?
No, I don't think there would be a need to, based off of what I would ideally like. With the business plan that we have in mind, we're going to be fairly limited to the size of our brewing equipment. So based off of that, there becomes kind of a small funnel that we could fit everything through when it comes to, the ability to manage it and get the right amount of beer. So at some point we hit a capacity that we don't want to
All right.
expand to another $200,000 brewing system to be able
Okay.
to make those.
Could you describe a little bit, and I don't know if this is getting into other testimony that's going to come, but could you describe the layout of the facility you envision? I don't know if there's going to be renderings coming forward.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you to pull that up.
Oh, okay. We can get to that later on, but maybe you could just give a little description of how much of the space is going to be used purely for the brewing equipment versus, you mentioned a merchandise store component,
Sure.
and then also a tasting room component. So could you just describe how you envision the layout? And I understand we might get a visual later, but
Sure.
from your perspective as the,
Why don't we, I believe we have the, can we pull it up?
well, I'd like to,
If we can pull it up on the screen, so that way he's not.
Okay.
trying to guesstimate
That
that.
way-
You can do that while he
Yeah, and while they're working on it, I don't know if you're familiar with the bodega that used to be in the building.
I have been in that building.
Yeah, so there was a pickup station that was selling burritos. It was fairly small, I would say 12 by 14 size room. That is the merchandise room, merchandise being that you could pick up a t-shirt, a hoodie, but primarily, your to-go beer. So while they're pulling this up here, is it okay to approach the screen? It's the least for that point. So right here is showing what would be the merchandise room. So this small area. And during, any time of the day, while we would be brewing in this area, and these are 2 different floors, so we're looking at ground floor, street floor here, and then for those who aren't familiar with the building, it recedes back. So this is almost, basement level based off the pitch of the ground. So this being the lower floor, this is where we'd be doing the brewing. There's a large garage door here, and you can see how much the brewing equipment takes up. So this allows us to get in, the larger materials of brewing equipment, and this all becomes a work area here. A lot of storage area, and then additional storage area, work area here. So as I was referencing tasting room, it's not specifically a room, but more of a tasting counter. As you can see, these are called bright tanks. This is where you store the beer. After you've brewed it, you have to basically put it into the fermenters, and then from there, these get chilled. And it's in a walk-in cooler to save on the cost of having to chill each individual vessel. Those items in the walk-in cooler gave us this opportunity to just put that tasting counter, I'll say, right against that. This is a little bit incorrect here. This doesn't go over here because you need to be able to get these bright tanks in this store. So that's actually should end here. I believe it's common. So this area here would be where somebody could come in and stand and taste, and they might be doing that. But this right here is a actual lower level with this on top, which is separate from the business. Would be roped off. So from here to here would all be roped off, and this grayed out area would be the only floor space for the public. So going back to the question of whether people would sit down and really take up shop at the bar, there wouldn't really be much room for you to maneuver during those times.
Let me just ask, this area would be open to the public?
No, that's just the gray.
Just this area?
That's correct.
Okay, and how many people are able to fit in here, do you know?
I would say 15 people comfortably.
15 people.
Yeah, 15, maybe 20 if people weren't sitting, just understanding.
Okay. And if you talk to the, is that capacity been determined for you by, say, the fire marshal or anybody like that?
It has not, no, no, we're still looking for the approval to get those.
Okay. Now, what is this area on the second floor here?
I can't speak specifically to it on the pond capacity, but that's a separate area that's a different business entity. The only part that we would be using on the first floor is an office space that would be right next to the merchandising area or takeout area. So in a bathroom as well.
Let me make sure I understand. You're not going to be occupying the whole space, the whole premises here?
The whole premises, no.
You're just on the first floor of the premises?
The first street level floor, we're partially, which is this area here. And then this door here, which leads into that area, is a separate business. So really, our jurisdiction is right here. These stairs bring us down into this area. You can see they're here again.
When you say it's a separate business, is this part of the Diego's restaurant?
Again, I can't speak to specifically what the business is or how it all ties together.
We'll be get to that with Mr. Kirkland.
Okay. So for your operation, just again, so I can kind of envision how it's laid out. On Quinnipiac Avenue is right here.
Yes.
You can come in this door and buy some merchandise. And then you would go downstairs here.
If there was a need to, and somebody came in here and wanted to go into the brewery, they could walk down these stairs, which would then bring them out here into the brewery.
Okay, so the public can come in here, get downstairs, and that's how they would access over here?
Well, not entirely true. If I was brewing this, they wouldn't be allowed to walk through the brewing area. They'd have to walk around to come into the back, which would be another entrance.
So is this entrance off the back where the new deck is proposed, is that primarily for the public to come in and out of?
Yeah, except for it's ground level, it's not through the deck.
That's ground level?
There's a second, I believe it's an egress out the second floor for the other business.
Okay, and we'll be getting to that.
Yeah, we're getting all that, yeah.
Okay. All right.
And we're trying to go like,
Now, you said you've been in the brewing industry for about 3 years, setting up breweries.
Installing.
How, and installing them even,
That's what I was doing.
does that get to the point of how you deal with the waste that is generated with breweries?
The waste that's generated in breweries? Physically, no, it does not.
Okay, so do you have an understanding of that, however, in terms of the waste that's generated through the brewing process?
Yeah, I do have an understanding of it.
Can you explain that process?
Well, yeah, basically I guess the most significant part of it is that the water coming in, being used to brew, is going into cans or some other vessel leaving the premises. So the majority of the water that you're actually needing to supply your beer with goes into the brewing process and isn't waste. That process is basically bringing it in through a filter. It goes into the brewing kettle. You add, your contents to brew. You make your brew, and then it goes into those staging vessels for fermenting, and then into the brine tanks, and then for sale. So whether it be through the tasting room, or a 30-pack to go, or a keg that's distributed.
There's a lot of material that's left from the other ingredients, though, right? Like the hops or the wheat or whatever it is. There's a lot of other ingredients that go into making the beer, right?
That's correct.
And that all doesn't end up in a can, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So what happens with all the stuff that you're, brewing the beer with once you're done with it?
Well, the mash or the wort is what's left over. That gets all taken out, and as this gets approved, we'll start to reach out to local farmers to come and collect that waste, and that usually gets supplied to somebody. They'll take it for free. Sometimes they'll pay you for it because it feeds their livestock.
Okay. And on the floor of the brewery there, is there drainage built in?
Yes, they'll need to be, yeah.
And what is that drainage tied into?
The drainage would be tied into whatever the drain system would be, whether I believe this is a public water system, so that would have to go into the drain.
Okay, and have you talked to the Department of Utilities who manages that to, you know, look at those hookups and the type of discharge that you're going to be putting in there?
No, have not.
Okay.
Still waiting for approval.
Now, you indicated you feel like you have some limitations on how big you can get because of for a number of reasons, the amount you can brew there, but also you mentioned the parking.
Yeah, I wouldn't call the parking a limitation necessarily. I just think it's a variable to consider.
Okay, so where is everybody going to park?
Well, in the parking spaces that are available
Ju-
on the premises.
Again, I have the owner of the property who's going to be testifying.
Okay.
on parking and so.
All right, well, maybe we'll let him move on. I just maybe reserve the right to call Mr., is it
The care.
Piquera,
Yeah.
just in case there's some additional
Absolutely.
follow-up. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so at this time, I would ask Mr. Kermel be sworn in. He's the member of the LLC that owns the property.
Raise your right hand, sir. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Speak into the mic and state your name and address for the record.
Scott Kermel, 205 Seaside Drive, Jamestown, Rhode Island.
And spell your last name for the,
Kirmil.
thank you.
All right, so Mr. Kermel, you're the member of the On the Pond LLC, which is the owner of the property in question, 124 Quinnick Ave, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. And so you're the owner as well as a petitioner in connection with this application, is that correct?
yes,
Okay. And so we've just heard from Mr. Piquera indicating that the proposal is to have a brewery located in the, you know, the first level, kind of basement type level of this building. Is that your understanding?
yeah, and I get it is slightly confusing. It's almost a 3-split level building, so that retail spot in the front, that is the bodega, is straight street level. The basement's maybe halfway sunken, and that's really the bulk of the space. It was a big industrial garage forever. And then several steps up again, there's like a third tier that's above the basement that's shaded. And we're also members of Diego's Middletown LLC, and that's basically storage for our catering. So there's 2 walk-in coolers, shelving, and all our chafing dishes and stuff like that. So we hold a catering license under that kitchen. So it's been a commercial kitchen for like 20 years, a bunch of different caterers. We just only need that one part of the building, so it's a separate space.
Could you identify on the screen where that catering business and the storage currently exists?
Yeah, they basically, it's the shaded part. So if you came in here, it's what used to be the Diego's Bodega, that small room there, which we'd be renting to them as like a retail area. You would go up 2 short flights of stairs here, and then you enter this big rectangular room. The back was like, I think their office, and that's kind of storage also, but it's just a big open kitchen. It was chanterelle, blue rock, possibilities. It's always had some sort of food manufacturing use.
Right, so that's been going on for quite some time as a food manufacturing use.
Yeah, I've been told 15 years. Possibilities, I think, did make food in the space that we're looking at renting down on the ground floor. But then eventually when he closed it, Aardvark Properties just filled it with junk, and that's how, when we took it over, it was kind of just a hoarder style space.
Okay. And so the catering operation that is ongoing there is been ongoing for some time and will continue to operate moving forward, is that correct?
Yeah, it's a small part of our business. We do mostly, what we do is our restaurants, but maybe like 4-5% last year was catering. So that's what we use. It's mostly for storage. So when we wanted to do events, the health department with our restaurants and the smaller kitchens wouldn't allow us unless we showed extra cold storage. How are you going to feed 200 people when you don't have an extra refrigerator? So that's why we keep that space.
Okay, all right. So then, in connection with the some of the questions I think that the city of Newport is getting towards, kind of revolves around the parking for this property. Now, on the revised site plan that was provided to the zoning board, we do show a traffic pattern internally and as well as 12 spaces provided for parking. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. We do also provide the loading zone, right, which will be used to service both the brewery and the catering operation when they do operate. Right? Is that
Yeah,
Okay.
it's both pretty limited, but at least they'll now be a designated spot because there's been,
okay?
the whole lot hasn't been really labeled.
Okay,
accordingly.
and then to clarify, we do also have a parking agreement with the abutting property, which is the DeBlois Gallery, right? And could you just walk the board through kind of what that agreement entails and how that relates to this proposal?
Yeah, we rent another, if you're familiar with the fence in front of Kindart and the gallery that runs on Aquidneck Avenue, we rent, and they've been labeled for some times, another 6 parking spots there from him, from TJ Realty, who owns that whole parking lot. Basically, Kindart, everyone, even the staff is gone by 5:15, 5:30, so they empty out, and they're closed on weekends. And then DeBlois Gallery is off-season, maybe open on the weekends. Most weekdays they're not there. Summer they do like a few openings on Saturday nights, I think 3 times a season or something. So they don't have a lot of use at night when our restaurant is busier. So TJ Realty had no problem renting out those, and so we also took some extra spaces knowing that we wanted to rent part of this space next door. We wanted to maximize our parking for both. We also, in summer, we don't have staff cars anymore. Kind of learned some things after 1 year of operating in these properties. Since we've only been there 1 season full on.
Okay. So the agreement with the abutting property owner is to provide an additional 6 spaces after 5 o'clock for the use for this property. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So although there's 12 spaces shown during the hours that we've just heard about from Mr. Piquera, when there would be more public actually going to the site, we are actually providing what would amount to 18 spaces. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, and the idea is, since those spots can be more confusing to guests, then obviously Mr. Piquera, his brewing partner, would probably put their vehicles there. If they needed any sort of vehicles, they'd put them off in those rented spots.
Okay. Now, we've also revised the circulation on the site a little bit following some consultation with Mr. Paul Bannon, which has resulted in this circulation pattern that was provided to the zoning board. And so if we could just kind of walk through that quickly, the understanding is that in order to provide the safest means of ingress and egress to the site, we will be actually directing traffic via signage to come in through the alleyway on 116 Aquidneck Avenue, in between the 2 buildings, so that they can enter in at that entrance and then circulate onto 124 Aquidneck Avenue, and then have one means of egress at the corner of the building with more appropriate sight lines and the ability to make those turns. Right? I think that was our understanding.
Yep. Everyone talked about maybe putting together it's called a signage package, as far as more clearly labeling what we want people to do, because there was definitely some confusion in the past, even from staff and deliveries and stuff. So we want it to be arrowed. We want new parking spaces done, a new top coat, and new signage, so there's a better flow and it's not people going both directions.
And so when we're discussing kind of the existing conditions on the site, you're currently required to pull in and then come back out of that one curb cut to the north of the building, right? That's the kind of existing conditions.
Yes, and it's not really clearly labeled. So.
Right, and as you've indicated, it sounds like we've run into some issues in the past related to that, and so this is an attempt to try and moderate any impacts that might result. Is that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've had any traffic jams or accidents or anything like that, but just people confused as to which way to go, so that's what we're trying to sort out.
Okay. All right, and then, so there is also a variance request associated with this application, so if we could just take a moment to discuss where that comes from and why we are requesting the relief we are. Can you just discuss on the site plan, there is an existing deck that is shown on the rear of the building. Is that currently in existence?
No, it was like most of the rear lot, which had kind of turned into a junkyard. This had rotten and decayed, so first step we went on it, we went right through it. So it's basically blocked off now pending this. It wasn't to code as far as egress size anyway. It was an old Home Depot homemade deck sort of thing. But basically it's an emergency egress off the catering space up above. We have one way in right now, and we need a back way out. So it has nothing to do with the lower lease space. It's not included in their lease, and they have the brewery but have no use of that deck. It's literally just an entryway. But from what I've learned, codes have changed. That entryway now has to be covered, has to be wider than it was. And the way it went down, it also really didn't make sense with the parking plan. So we're kicking it over and then going down for a better egress.
All right, and so by doing that, we've also opened up an additional parking space. Is that that's
Yeah.
Okay.
And also more so the garage down below is a bit of a cave over in that whole corner. So having the deck go over this way allows us to put windows in there and get some natural light in, which makes it a much more leasable space, obviously.
All right, and just so we're clear, in terms of the that egress, it is required. It's something that has to be done. We're simply asking for the alteration to make it a more usable egress pattern, which will ultimately allow for a better parking plan for this site.
Yeah, the fire department knows about it. They know it's blocked off, but it's got to get fixed. So there's a door, goes out to what's like an old head house that's also rotten, and then it just goes to nowhere right now. So we'd be ripping that off and doing a new tied-in deck that has to be covered for snow and all that.
All right, and then just one final component that I know will be raised by the city. There was, when we're discussing 124 Aquinic Avenue, the kind of existing conditions prior, the parking area extended beyond the actual lot line. There was some old pavement that actually extended beyond. All of that has been removed at this time beyond the 124 Aquinic Avenue property line, and we have pulled all of that back so that way we are up to the property line and not encroaching onto the city of Newport from this property. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I believe that's all my questions for Mr. Kermel. If you have any for the owner, I'm happy to have him answer at this time.
Were any of the, either these 12 parking spaces or the rented parking spaces used to get the permit for either Easton's Point or any restaurant before that and or Diego's?
No, no one had ever rented from the gallery, and zoning laws don't allow any inclusion of this in that license.
And how wide is the deck on the second floor? Like my point what I'm getting at is, you know, can we double the size of the amount of people that are going to be able to hang out, or people are going to be hanging out on that deck?
They're not allowed to go
look
up.
at the view.
It'll just be a roped up. It's literally just an emergency egress. So it's the minimum width to code, which I think might be 42 inches, or something like that. But there's no. So the brewery entrance is down here. The deck will be above it. So there's no.
That is
Permission to
that
use
has
it.
no connection to the brewery itself. It's just part of the application. Since there is going to be alterations occurring at the building, we figured we would apply for all this in one setting.
Yeah, it is confusing on the plan, but it's above the brewery space. So literally, like not a fire escape, but that sort of runway.
How many square feet does the brewery take up, and how many square feet does the storage area take up?
I don't know if you have the.
Yeah, we got the number.
Yeah,
One
the
second.
exact-
Mr. Kane, while they're looking that up, where does this fall under the parking, under the manufacturing?
Yes, it does.
So
It's
the-
one space for each person on the largest shift.
Yeah, so
I'm
the-
sorry, for each two employees on the
yeah.
largest shift.
And then how does the retail component fit into that?
The
It's
retail,
minimal.
with the brewery, the retail is actually an accessory to the
Accessory use.
manufacturing use, so it's not calculated separately.
In regards to the prior question, the total square footage of the brewery component would be 3,800 square feet. That's the total leasable area that would be provided for that use. And then the second floor has a total leasable area of just over 2,300.
And you say there's very little employee access up there.
Yeah, it's mostly for our storage. So
Right.
if anything, on a day of an event, we might have one person getting everything together up there. A lot of it might be cooked next door. We have like one oven, a 4-foot hood, a little stove there. So it's always just been a catering kitchen. I think it didn't have a full catering kitchen setup, is why a few of them have left.
I have no further questions at this time. I'm not sure, Gerard, if you want to. Yes.
Currently, on the premises that we see here, there's the catering business upstairs, is that right? And what's there now currently where the brewery is going to be going? Storage.
Tools, junk.
Is there an ice cream shop somewhere?
We did that last season. We didn't renew the license and didn't renew any of that, just stuff. Facility. That was the old bodega. We flipped it. Kind of a temporary thing while we tried to come up with a better plan for the whole building.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. I'll start from the beginning. The ice cream shop was there for one season, last season. It was under Diego's Middletown, and it was kind of just a temporary, Hershey's gives you all the equipment. We figured we'd see how it went. But it was just while we kind of figured out what to do with this building.
All right. Is there any way we could flip back to the inflow of the traffic? Thanks, Spencer. Now, there's Diego's on the lot next door, and then this building to the north. And there's a lane of traffic that's expressed on the site plans that would be an ingress to the property, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And right now, what is this used for currently?
We have some equipment there. Again, nothing really. There's some storage, nothing. There's no signage, so no one really goes in there. When we got deliveries, when we were building Easton, some of the trucks pulled in there and unloaded because it was closer to a side door, but it's kind of useless space right now.
Has it ever been used as an ingress to either of these properties since you've owned it?
I've seen people coming in and out. Some of our guests did in the summer. I know Easton's used to use it. I guess they used to park there too, so.
Okay. Now, that brings up the point of, when did you purchase the subject property, this
Early January 2018.
And was that a separate transaction from this, or was it
Both separate.
was this also purchased in January of?
Yeah,
18?
a week or two apart.
Okay. And right now, you filed a lawsuit against the city of Newport attempting to claim ownership of this rectangle here to the west of this property, correct?
Yes.
And that's based on the theory of adverse possession?
Yeah, it's been used, paved, maintained for over 20 years by this business. It was also on several maps all over, surveys, in error, no dispute, but it was even on the zoning approval map that we pulled before we bought the property for Easton's liquor license. When they extended their pub, cited that land it's drawn on. And what I've learned after is that a lawyer did it and it's just an error and no one noticed. So I don't want the board to think we just went in blind, like, oh, that must be ours, it's on paper.
And currently, you are utilizing this for parking for Diego's?
Yes.
And also there are signs up currently directing traffic for the ice cream shop, which is over here, to park here as well, correct?
Maybe they were from last year.
Okay.
That's been closed for a while.
Okay. Well, I drove by today and they're still up. So there's parking signs for patrons to park here on City of Newport property and visit this premises.
Yeah, when it wasn't leased, it was under one company, so why would we care who parks where? Now it's gonna be a different story.
Now, in addition to this parking on the City of Newport land, there's other parking on this property, correct?
Yes.
Now, we're looking at a site plan that directs traffic through this property. It doesn't, for this property, and it doesn't identify where the parking is on this property.
Because the two are separate.
Yeah, I can address that with the traffic expert who put that.
Okay.
Go back to
So catering's gonna continue on this site?
that. It's catering storage, so we don't,
Catering and storage? So where are the catering folks gonna park?
it's our same staff from next door. That's the kitchen guys over there. We just store food there because we need bigger walk-ins,
Right, but they're operating on this site.
and they're not parking there. If they were, if we did have a staff that needed to park there for catering, they'd be in our leased spots on TJ Realty's land.
I'll just clarify a couple things. So, Mr. Galvin's indicated, the fact that there was signage to direct parking to the lot 116 I believe the understanding is that that is all based off of the current ingress egress, which requires cars to pull in and come out of this one curb cut on the north side of 124. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And so based on input from Mr. Bannon, who we'll hear from in a little bit, the proposal is to alleviate that issue of having cars coming in and out of one curb cut and to circulate on site. And that is the current proposal before us, so that they would be circulating onto the brewery parking area through the alleyway.
Yes, we didn't really do any signage until this was approved and a new package is generated.
Correct. And so just so we're clear in terms of the kind of internal signage and traffic flow, the arrows that you see will be kind of incorporated into the top coat, I believe is the understanding, right? And we'll be providing signage internally to direct cars so they understand where to flow and how to park for the brewery itself. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay. All right. I don't believe I have any further questions for Mr. Kermel at this time. All right. I do have Mr. Nathan Godfrey here, who I would ask be brought forward to provide his testimony. I believe he'll likely be the last witness, aside from Mr. Bannon, who may have to address some questions for Mr. Galvin, given that he provided the parking area.
Good evening.
Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
My name's Nathan Godfrey. I'm a real estate appraiser and consultant with offices at 221 3rd Street in Newport, the principal of Newport Appraisal Group.
Mr. Godfrey, you've appeared before the board on numerous occasions. We're going to recognize you as expert in the area of real estate. Trent.
Thank you.
Mr. Godfrey, are you familiar with the application that has been filed by On the Pond Realty, or On the Pond LLC and Mr. Justin Piquera?
Yes, sir.
And have you reviewed the application as well as visited the site?
I have.
And have you prepared a report based on your review of the application and the location itself?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Has that report been provided to the board yet?
Not yet.
Okay. If I could, I would ask that Mr. Godfrey be allowed to submit his report, and then he can provide a summary of his findings that are contained within it.
We'll recognize it as Exhibit B. Thank you.
So, Mr. Godfrey, could you just provide the board with a brief overview of what's contained within this report?
Sure. I start with the application. I've visited the site several times. Your dimensional variance relates to your rebuilding of the exterior staircase. Your special use permit relates to the use of the brewery. Once I've looked at the application and visited the site, I go back, sit down with your ordinance, your comp plan, your Atlantic Beach district plan, and begin to form some opinions. So that's the process that goes through it. That is summarized here. You have a 5-step process for the special use permit that must be met, and 5 steps in the dimensional variance that must also be met. Those are detailed in here. You're familiar with them. I can go through them as you see fit. Also part of my review on this case, sort of the historical side of it. This was one of the very first properties I was involved with when I got into this. Looking back to 1989 and then 2004 with Bank Newport and some changes of ownership, it's always been a property I've been interested in. So I actually had a 2004 appraisal on this. I went back and took a peek at it.
If you wouldn't mind, could you just walk the board through the special use criteria and how this proposal relates to them?
Sure. If you were to look at, please start on page 6. You've got your section 902, your special permit standards. The use will not result in a diminution of, significant diminution of property values in the surrounding area or district. Number 2, will not create a nuisance in the neighborhood. Number 3, it will be compatible with the comprehensive community plan for the town. Number 4, that granting such a special use permit will not be detrimental or substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use of property in the surrounding district. And finally, the granting of a special use permit will not result in hazardous conditions or conditions inimical to public health, safety, and welfare. This is a property, in my opinion, that is sort of a challenge, given what exists, the site configuration, the location. It's going to be a challenge for any use to go in there and utilize this property in the manners that we're going to likely see it without having some of these persistent issues. The traffic pattern is there. It's not going to change from the use especially. There's very little you can do with it. Proximity to the pond, the state improvements out front or lack of them, the sidewalk and so forth, those are all issues that, regardless of the use, are going to be imposed upon this property. The food service and related uses have existed there for a long time. I think we're familiar with those. As far as that being appropriate for the neighborhood, this is a neighborhood that thrives on food service uses. I don't see that a brewery being a nuisance in this position. The brewery as a use we're seeing more and more in suburban settings. Newport's always had the Coddington Brewery and Newport Storm. You can go up and down the coast. Westerly has Gray Sail. South Kingstown has had 2 or 3. There's currently 2. Proclamation Ale is over there. North Kingstown has the Tilted Barn. These are all small operations, relatively speaking, brewing a craft beer. And I've been watching those as a use. I'm interested in it. My opinion is when they're done at this scale, they don't present a lot of obstacles or hurdles. I've watched Proclamation Ale because I rent space across the street from it, and it's one of the larger craft breweries, and there's a non-issue. Their Friday afternoon is sort of fun, but it's only for 2 hours. They're in and out, and as a use, I'm very comfortable with it. With regards to your comprehensive community plan, I've detailed, starting on page 4 and on to 5, what your comp plan looks for. One of the items that you've heard me go over before, the protection of community character, and specifically goal 2B, the redevelopment of vacant and underutilized commercial properties. Well, that's exactly what this is. It's one of the few down there, although I think you can look across the street and find another underutilized property in my estimation. But I believe that what's proposed here and what's involved in a brewery is a good use and brings that up to an appropriate use. With regards to your Atlantic Beach District and what is identified there, pages 5 and 6, I believe this is very consistent with what your town council was looking for. So your third item, your comp plan criteria is met, and with that, numbers 4 and 5 are also met. This is an appropriate use. It's always been some sort of catering operation or the bodega. And lastly, the granting will not permanently result in hazardous conditions or injure some sort of public health, safety, or welfare. I just simply don't see it. It's going to be organized appropriately in the appropriate spot. There's, for a change, enough parking spaces. If we can access them in an appropriate manner, I think we're in good shape. That's the special use permit.
I don't have any other specific follow-up questions for Mr. Godfrey. If the board has any questions related to his testimony, I'm happy to hear them.
Portsmouth just went through the approval process for one of their first breweries as well. forgot to mention that, but that's a recent approval.
I think, good.
I think at this time, I'm probably prepared to allow Mr. Galvin to both cross-examine Mr. Godfrey as well as any of the other experts we have here. I don't think we need any direct testimony from Mr. Bannon, Mr.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Bannon.
Okay, we can certainly have him come up then, but we'll let Mr. Godfrey respond to
Yeah.
the questions first.
Yeah, just very briefly, Mr. Godfrey, just, the last point you made was relative to the parking, and you said, you know, if we can arrange for some other parking on other, you know, with some of the neighbors, then it won't impact the health, safety, and welfare. Is that right?
I don't believe I said that. What I mean to say was they have the parking places. If the overall parking plan can accommodate them, we're in a win situation.
If, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, so at this time, I'd ask Mr. Bannon to come forward to provide some testimony related to the traffic impacts of this site.
Mr. Bannon, raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your name and address for the record.
My name is Paul Bannon, B-A-N-N-O-N, 53rd Street, Barrington, Rhode Island.
Mr. Bannon, you've appeared before the board on numerous occasions in your capacity as a traffic engineer.
That's
so
correct.
we're prepared to accept you this evening as an expert.
Thank you.
Mr. Bannon, you are familiar with this application as well as the site, is that correct?
Yes, I've met on the site with the applicant and the property owners.
Okay. And based on that meeting, you had a couple suggestions related to the traffic pattern, which were ultimately incorporated into the proposal that's on the screens today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you just briefly walk us through kind of what we're seeing here in terms of the circulation and kind of what your thoughts are as to why this is an improvement as to the current conditions?
The previous access to this lot, the bodega and catering building, was limited to the northerly side. It was two-way traffic through this driveway and in here. There's parking on the side here, and there was no cross-access between. So it was confined to the property. Now that the property is in one ownership, properties are in one ownership, they've done a lot and cleaned up the back and made it more functional. So in him operating last year and the issues they had with the city identifying parking in the back, people were parking all over the place. Parking wasn't defined. So now we've come up with a plan that will provide one-way circulation around the property, have defined parking spaces. The Cumberland Farms to the south, that property has become more active with its refurbishing. So as Scott had indicated, you know, he had a two-way access on the southern side, and he feels that it'll be better that we limit activity there and allow one-way entrance so there's less conflict with the adjacent property. And we've cleaned up or proposed the exit on the northerly side, so we've eliminated the two-way flow in a confined area that had parking adjacent to the building. So we see this as a clean traffic flow and defined parking for this use.
When it comes to the northerly curb cut that we're now sending cars out of, could you just discuss any impacts related to any sight lines or anything that may pose a hazard turning onto Aquidneck Avenue?
No, there are no issues relative to sight lines to the north and south of that driveway. Yes, the sidewalk is very limited in there. When the DOT comes in, they'll end up pushing the curb line out and providing proper access along the frontage there. But this being an old existing condition, it is what it is. But we're far enough away on that curb cut to position ourselves to adequately see in both directions to enter and to exit the property, as does the adjacent property.
if there's any questions the board might have at this point.
I've been to the site, so I know that the property to the south, that dotted line, the arrows, that goes through open areas now, correct?
Correct.
There's not parking spots there.
No.
I've been there, so I know that, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, again, that was blocked off before when it was
Right.
two separate businesses, so there wasn't a flow and people did use the alley. But now it's in the process of being cleaned up. It's a lot cleaner than it was, and there's flow through it. And as we go through the process, as Scott indicated, we'll provide more detail on the parking, striping and signing through the property.
Thank you.
I'm not really, so where the arrow, so on the Diego side, the arrows come down, I guess, to the west, and then take yeah, right? So there's not parking in the middle there? There always used to be.
They'll be parking here and here.
But in the middle, there's no longer parking there?
No, this will be a clean island for the car.
Okay. So then how many spaces will be there?
I haven't done a parking plan for Diego's. And again, Scott had indicated, he's secured off-site parking spaces.
Now, in your opinion, this circulation pattern is an improvement over what currently exists for this site?
Yes. And it's a low-intensity use. For most of the day, you'll have two people on the property. When he goes to work at 7, 8 in the morning to start the brewing process, the brewer and the master brewer are the only people on the property, and that's what they're going to be doing there all day, manufacturing beer. It's only during the late afternoon and evening hours that you'd potentially have use for those additional spaces. And he's looking for foot traffic, neighbors, abutting restaurants, hotels that would buy his product.
I have no further questions. I think Mr. Galvin wants to step in.
Mr. Galvin?
Good evening, Mr. Bannon. Just as a starting point, if you're directing traffic through a separate lot, which services a retail operation like a restaurant, wouldn't it be fair to show the zoning board where the parking is on that lot? So
It's not part of the application.
But driving through that property is part of the application.
They don't necessarily have to drive through that. He's obtained an easement through the alleyway where there's no need to go through that parking lot. It's an option to go through the parking lot.
It's an option.
Correct. It's not a need. They've.
So they don't need this. You can take that
Correct.
out. You can take that out of the plan we've just submitted today. After 6 months of traffic coming in this way on the plan, today we get one coming in through these two lanes, and now tonight you're saying you don't need this one?
Overall, for access to the secondary property, no, but to allow availability for access to the properties, it's a good and proper design.
I'd like to refer to Mr. Godfrey's report. You haven't seen that yet, right? Page 16, if you all have it. This is an image from the western portion of the subject property, looking to the east, correct?
Correct.
And if you look to the left-hand side, you'll see a telephone pole with a car parked right in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
That is
The corner of this property.
the corner of this property.
Correct.
And so, just to give perspective to the zoning board, the 12-foot gap would be, what, 2 or 3 feet to the left of that vehicle there?
No, there's a 24-foot driveway that has always been used for access to this parcel.
24 foot. Right.
There is no access there.
Right. So currently, it's total access from yet another property on the other side, correct?
Correct.
And you're proposing a 12-foot egress for 2 retail operations, a manufacturing operation which will have deliveries, correct?
Managed deliveries.
Managed
And
deliveries.
that was explained by the owner that they're extremely limited.
And it will be shipping product out, correct?
In vans, yes.
Okay. And all of that flow has to come through a 12-foot space here and a 12-foot space here, which currently has a telephone pole in front of it, correct?
You can't get through on the north side of the building on our property. There's a telephone pole and there's curbing. So the only access has been forever to that parcel is on the adjoining parcel.
Right. There's no access to it on this plan, correct? There's no ingress to the property on your plan.
Correct.
And you testified earlier you didn't do any analysis relative to the parking, correct?
The parking met the zoning.
You didn't analyze that?
Correct.
Okay.
So, just as a quick clarification, the existing traffic flow is to come in through the north cut, as we're now showing as simply an egress, and the entire intention here is to try and improve the traffic flow and circulation down on Lower Aquidneck Avenue, which is currently facing significant traffic issues as just a general problem for the town. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
We're
so
simplifying access and egress to these two businesses.
Correct. And so this proposed traffic pattern is an attempt by the owner and the applicant to try and provide a benefit not only to their site but to the surrounding community. Is that correct?
Yes, and when you, as a design element, as a traffic engineer, if you have, in an effort for access management and limiting curb cuts, you like businesses that have cross-access, especially if you're traveling to the multiple businesses. So allowing cross-access to adjoining properties is a goal when we do.
Christian worked with this piece of property where the old marina, the telephone pole that he's got in question in the right side. There used to be a marina, I don't know exactly what it is now, to the right side of that, with an offset fence. Is that grandfathered in where they have an arrangement between the two properties to utilize that area?
Yeah, and again, that's part of the agreement that, as was discussed previously with TJ Realty, the fact that this is the improvement to that curb cut to provide a simplified access for both 124 as well as the adjacent parcel that TJ Realty owns. And in connection with that, we're also receiving the 6 parking spaces after 5 p.m. So that is the intention, and you will also find in the letters of support, a letter of support from the Boy Gallery, who is the current tenant of that parcel, who is in favor of this proposal.
So is that a deeded easement then?
It is not. That is simply, I guess, a grandfathered use. There's no dispute. It's not an adverse possession. It's essentially an easement by necessity at this time, and that is, again, per the agreement between the two parties for that access.
I knew when it was a marina, they used to have a fence that was not parallel to Aquidneck, but on an angle going into the property.
Correct.
So that
And you can kind of see it.
truck.
Yeah, you can actually see it shown on this plan as well. It is still there, and it will continue to exist.
Yeah, and for them to get access to the rear of their property, they need to get on this property. So
Right.
it's a mutual benefit.
Mutual.
Right. These are long-standing existing.
But there's nothing deeded. It's not deeded, it's just a
They need each other.
common practice.
I have no further questions for Mr. Bannon. I think at this time, I'm happy to allow Mr.
I've got a question for Mr. Banner before you
Yeah,
go.
go ahead.
The center ingress route, if you look at the pictures also, you can see that there's stuff that was stored in there in the past. So as part of this design, there will not be anything allowed in there.
No. He uses it as a convenience, as Diego's for the catering in between the two
Right.
businesses, the properties. So
Right.
it's just a matter of it's out of the way. He didn't need the aisle for anything.
Right, but for
That'll
now
be
on,
That'll be cleared, signed, and marked accordingly.
okay. There was also a couple of pylons in that alley that protected some kind of either gas or electric boxes, are those gonna still exist there?
I don't know of any building modification.
On the outside of the building, the one we're talking about,
Mhm.
there are a couple of pylons, I think they're cement. They're, I would guess about 10 feet in from the corner, and they look like they protect some kind of power box or something. That's gonna stay,
It's the gas meters.
okay, gas meters.
So they'll be better defined and
Okay, and then also protect.
protected.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have no further questions. I'm happy to kind of turn it over to Mr. Galvin here before our closing remarks.
Well, I guess I inquired who did the parking analysis, was it Mr. Russell?
So, sure, I can have Mr. Russell come up. In terms of compliance with the zoning, right, I'm clear on the question.
How did you, who determined how many parking spaces were needed and where they should go?
Have Mr. Russell come up. At this point, it was not a question of necessity as much as the availability of parking spaces.
We worked with Mr. Russell,
Yes,
This is Mr. Madden.
Mr. Bannon. We worked with Mike. We only needed 4 parking spaces. So it was a
Mr.
matter
Galvin,
of,
the code defines the parking as such. A manufacturing space requires 4. There's 2 manufacturing spaces on the property. That equates to 8. There's 1 retail space of less than 1,000 square feet, which means that it needs a minimum of, I believe, 4 spaces.
Well, Mr.
So they have 12, which is the minimum required for the uses that are in the building currently. That's from me reading the code.
Right.
So,
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
just for the record, the retail space, as I mentioned before, is accessory to
Right.
the manufacturing
So they
use.
actually have more spaces.
And I did look at the parking when the application was submitted. The manufacturing use bases it on that 1 space per 2 employees on the largest shift. And I think what really should be at least put on the record is, what do they intend to have for number of employees?
He stated,
testified to
we have that in the record, 3 to 4 max. I
For
wrote
each
it down.
business, or,
Well, I
I
asked
understand what Mr.
the owner,
Vermeer
he said there weren't many people going into the,
Correct. I'll have Mr. Kermel clarify on the second,
that was my reason for asking,
yeah, I can clarify that.
so.
So we just maxed out the available square footage with proper marking dimensions. We also provided a bicycle space for bikes and scooters.
Does that also include handicap?
Yes. I believe there was the 12 will be the handicap space.
12 would be handicap?
Yes.
Mr.
Well,
Galvin.
may I, so, Mr. Bannon, in determining the amount of parking spaces, and Mr. Kane just walked us through his analysis when the application was filed. It's not clear to me whether Mr. Kane knew of all the various uses going on in the building when the application was filed. But are you familiar with the concept of having to aggregate parking for the number of, the variety of uses on a particular property?
Yes.
Okay, so in that circumstance, if you have a manufacturing use on top of a catering use, on top of a retail use, on top of potentially a bar use, you would need a heck of a lot more parking spaces than the manufacturing use, correct?
Not this type of operation.
And
It's
why,
not
why is that?
Because it's not again, you go there at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you're gonna see 2 cars in the parking lot, no activity, because he's in the back room brewing with his master brewer.
Okay.
That's all that's going on the
Right.
property.
How about from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock?
Then there will be activity on the property, but there's no restaurant, limited seating, limited restricted alcohol consumption and sale.
And-
So it's a low intensity use for what actually could be in that square footage of property.
But
You
that
could
act,
have another restaurant there.
and there won't be any manufacturing going on at that point, right?
Correct.
It'll all be retail, it will all be consuming alcohol at that point?
Yes.
Okay. Doesn't that, as a professional in the traffic engineering field, wouldn't that call for some additional parking?
And there's a number of additional parking spaces. The master brewer, he'll probably go for the day, and he may have 2 employees, one at the tap for tasting, and one maybe up front at retail.
Okay,
And they probably won't be parking on site. He could ride his bike to work.
I see.
And this is a, you know,
That's all I need.
Thank you, Mr. Bannon. Before you close your statements, why don't we take a short break and then come back in 5? Is that okay with you, Mr. Kane? We'll recess for 5 minutes.